You know that feeling when you watch something from your childhood and suddenly realize there was so much more happening behind the scenes than you ever imagined? Well, buckle up, because what Melissa Gilbert just revealed about her relationship with Dean Butler is about to completely change how you remember Little House on the Prairie. At 61 years old, she's finally ready to share the truth. And trust me, this is not what anyone expected. The bond between Laura Ingalls and Almanzo Wilder wasn't just acting. It was something far more complex, beautiful, and yes, a little bit heartbreaking. So before you click away, you need to hear this, because what she says in the next few minutes will make you see one of television's most beloved couples in an entirely new light. Let's rewind for a moment. Picture it, the late 1970s and early 1980s, when television was simpler, families gathered around a single TV set, and Little House on the Prairie was appointment viewing for millions. Melissa Gilbert had already captured America's heart as the spunky, determined Laura Ingalls, the second daughter of the Ingalls family living on the American frontier. She'd grown up on that show, literally. From the age of 9, she'd been working alongside television legends like Michael Landon, learning her craft, navigating the complexities of child stardom, and becoming a household name. But everything shifted when Dean Butler walked onto the set to play Almanzo Wilder, the man who would become Laura's husband both on screen and in the story that captivated a nation. Dean Butler wasn't just another actor joining a successful show. He was stepping into a role that held enormous significance for fans who had read the Laura Ingalls Wilder books and knew exactly where the story was headed. Almanzo was Laura's great love, her partner, the man she would build a life with against all odds on the unforgiving Prairie. The pressure was immense. The chemistry had to be perfect. The audience had to believe in their love story, or the entire emotional foundation of the show's later seasons would crumble. And here's where things get interesting, because what happened between Melissa and Dean went far beyond just professional chemistry. When Melissa talks about those early days with Dean, there's a warmth in her voice that's unmistakable. But there's also something else, a hint of wistfulness, maybe even a touch of what might have been. She's been candid over the years about her life, her struggles, her triumphs, but this particular revelation cuts deeper. She's admitted that working with Dean was unlike anything she'd experienced before on the show. Here was this older, more experienced actor. Dean was in his mid-20s when he joined the cast, while Melissa was still a teenager. And suddenly she found herself navigating not just the on-screen romance, but the very real and very complicated feelings that can develop when you're spending 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours a day creating intimate scenes with someone. The thing about Little House on the Prairie that made it so special was its authenticity. Michael Landon, who was not just the star but also the creative force behind much of the show, insisted on real emotion, real tears, real laughter. There was no room for phoniness. So when Laura and Almanzo fell in love on screen, Melissa and Dean had to access something genuine within themselves. They had to find that connection, that spark, that made audiences believe these two people were meant to be together. And they found it. Oh, did they find it? The chemistry was electric, palpable, undeniable. Fans could feel it radiating through their television screens. But what Melissa is now revealing is that the line between acting and reality became dangerously blurred. She's spoken about how Dean became her confidant during a tumultuous time in her life. Teenage years are challenging for anyone, but imagine going through them under the scrutiny of millions of viewers, with every awkward phase, every moment of self-doubt, every hormone-driven emotion playing out not just in private, but as part of your job. Dean represented something stable, something mature, something safe. He was kind when she needed kindness, patient when she needed patience, and understanding when the pressure of being America's favorite prairie girl became too much to bear. Their friendship deepened in ways that went far beyond the typical cast relationship. They talked about everything: their dreams, their fears, their complicated relationships with fame, their hopes for the future. But here's where Melissa's revelation becomes particularly poignant. She's now admitting that she developed feelings for Dean that went beyond friendship. Not a passing crush, not a fleeting infatuation, but something deeper, something that confused and frightened her at the time. She was young, impressionable, living in a world where the boundaries between Laura and Melissa were constantly shifting. Dean was everything that Almanzo was on screen: strong, reliable, protective. And she found herself drawn to him in ways that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. The question that haunted her then, and that she's only now fully processing, is whether those feelings were real or just a byproduct of the intense emotional work they were doing together. Dean, for his part, has always been respectful, professional, and deeply aware of the power dynamics at play. He knew Melissa was younger, he knew she was in a vulnerable position, and he navigated their relationship with extraordinary care. There was never anything inappropriate, never a line crossed that shouldn't have been crossed. But that doesn't mean he was unaware of the connection they shared. In his own interviews over the years, he's spoken about Melissa with genuine affection and admiration, calling her talented, dedicated, and one of the most professional young actors he'd ever worked with. But what he hasn't talked about, until Melissa started opening up, was whether he felt that same spark, that same complication of emotions that made their work together so powerful and so confusing. What makes this story even more compelling is the context of Melissa's personal life during and after Little House. She's been remarkably open about her romantic relationships, her marriages, her struggles with self-esteem and identity. She's talked about how growing up in the public eye affected her ability to form healthy relationships, how she confused attention with love, how she made choices in her personal life that she later regretted. And woven through all of those stories is this thread of wondering about Dean, about what might have been different if circumstances had been different, if she'd been older, if the show had continued longer, if life had taken a different turn. The revelation that's really making people gasp is Melissa's admission that Dean represented a kind of ideal to her. Not just as a romantic partner, but as a person. He embodied qualities that she found herself searching for in every relationship that followed. The kindness, the integrity, the emotional intelligence, the ability to be strong without being domineering, supportive without being controlling. She suggested that her subsequent relationships were, in some ways, attempts to recreate what she'd felt during those years working with Dean. That connection that felt so real, even though it existed in the strange liminal space between fiction and reality. Now, before you start thinking this is just a story about unrequited love or missed opportunities, there's more to it. What Melissa is really talking about is the complexity of human connection, especially in the artificial environment of television production. She's examining how we form attachments, how we create meaning, how we understand our own emotions when we're young and still figuring out who we are. Her relationship with Dean becomes a lens through which she's exploring larger questions about identity, authenticity, and the nature of love itself. Was what she felt real? Does it matter whether it was real? Can something be meaningful even if it was partly constructed, partly a product of circumstance and storytelling? Dean Butler has responded to Melissa's revelations with characteristic grace and thoughtfulness. He's acknowledged that their bond was special, that those years working together were formative for him as well, and that he treasures the friendship they've maintained over the decades. But he's also been careful not to romanticize or sensationalize what happened between them. He understands that Melissa is on her own journey of self-discovery and self-acceptance, and he respects her need to tell her story in her own way. His response has been supportive without being possessive, warm without being presumptuous. In other words, very much in character with the man Melissa has described. What's fascinating about this revelation is how it's resonating with people who grew up watching Little House on the Prairie. For many fans, Laura and Almanzo's relationship was a template for what love should look like. Respectful, supportive, built on friendship and mutual admiration. Learning that the actors themselves were navigating real feelings and real complications adds another layer of depth to those performances. It makes the awkward courting scenes more poignant, the marriage scenes more meaningful, the moments of conflict and resolution more authentic. Fans are going back and rewatching episodes with new eyes, looking for signs of what was happening beneath the surface, marveling at how two professionals managed to channel their complicated reality into art. But there's also a darker undertone to Melissa's story, one that speaks to the challenges of child stardom and the ways young performers can be emotionally exploited, even unintentionally. Melissa has been clear that no one on the Little House set ever treated her inappropriately, that she felt safe and protected, particularly by Michael Landon, who was fiercely protective of his young cast members. But she's also acknowledging that the very nature of the work, requiring young people to access and display deep emotions, to create intimate relationships, to blur the lines between self and character, carries inherent risks. Her confusion about her feelings for Dean wasn't anyone's fault, but it was a consequence of a system that asks children to do adult emotional work without necessarily providing them with the tools to process that work. This is where Melissa's story becomes particularly relevant to contemporary conversations about child actors and the entertainment industry. She's using her own experience to shine a light on issues that are only now being fully recognized and addressed. How do we protect young performers while still allowing them to do meaningful work? How do we help them distinguish between their own emotions and the emotions they're asked to portray? How do we ensure that the relationships formed on set remain healthy and appropriate, especially when there are age differences and power imbalances involved? These aren't easy questions, and Melissa isn't claiming to have all the answers, but she's starting important conversations. As Melissa has moved through her 60s, yes, it's hard to believe that little Laura Ingalls is now in her 60s, but time does that to all of us. She's gained perspective on those early experiences. She can look back with compassion for her younger self, understanding why she felt what she felt, forgiving herself for the confusion and the longing and the inevitable disappointment that came when she realized that the on-screen romance couldn't translate to real life in the way she'd half hoped it might. She can also appreciate what Dean gave her during that time: genuine friendship, professional respect, and an example of how to conduct oneself with integrity in an industry that doesn't always reward integrity. The relationship between Melissa and Dean has evolved over the decades into something quite beautiful: a deep, lasting friendship built on shared history and mutual respect. They've stayed in touch, supported each other's careers, celebrated each other's successes, and been there for each other during difficult times. They've appeared together at Little House conventions and reunions, delighting fans who still ship Laura and Almanzo after all these years. And in those appearances, you can see the genuine affection between them, the easy comfort that comes from having known someone during such a formative period of life. It's not romantic love, but it's love nonetheless, a connection that has endured and matured and become something perhaps more valuable than romance ever could have been. What Melissa seems to be saying, in her characteristically honest and introspective way, is that Dean Butler represented a moment in her life when anything seemed possible, when the world was full of promise, when she was becoming who she was going to be. He was tied up in all of that: the excitement of young adulthood, the satisfaction of doing work she was proud of, the sense of being part of something larger than herself. Looking back, she can see how she projected onto him all the hopes and dreams of that period, how he became symbolic of a certain ideal. And there's a bittersweet quality to that recognition, because it means accepting that what she felt, while real, was also in some ways a creation, a story she was telling herself alongside the story she was telling on screen. But here's the thing that makes this revelation ultimately uplifting rather than sad. Melissa has come to peace with it. She's not speaking from a place of regret or what if. She's speaking from a place of gratitude. Dean was exactly what she needed when she needed it. Their connection, whatever its precise nature, helped her through a challenging time and gave her standards for how she wanted to be treated in relationships going forward. Even if those standards proved hard to meet, even if she made mistakes in searching for someone who could measure up, she learned from those experiences. And Dean has remained a touchstone, a reminder of her own capacity for deep feeling, for loyalty, for creating meaningful connections even in the strangest circumstances. The story of Melissa Gilbert and Dean Butler is also a story about the power of television to shape our lives in unexpected ways. Little House on the Prairie wasn't just entertainment. It was a cultural phenomenon that influenced how millions of people thought about family, community, resilience, and love. The actors who brought those stories to life carried a responsibility, whether they wanted to or not, and that responsibility extended to their own relationships with each other. They weren't just creating a show. They were creating a world that people could believe in, could escape to, could draw strength from. And in creating that world, they had to live in it themselves for hours every day, which meant the boundaries between the fictional world and the real world became permeable in ways that could be both magical and confusing. Melissa's decision to break her silence about Dean at 61 is significant. This isn't the impulsive revelation of someone still caught up in the emotions of the experience. This is the considered, thoughtful reflection of someone who has lived a full life, who has perspective, who has done the work of understanding herself and her past. She's not trying to create controversy or generate headlines. Though, of course, given her fame and the enduring popularity of Little House, headlines are inevitable. She's trying to tell her truth, to complete the picture of who she was and who she's become, to honor something important in her life that has never quite been fully acknowledged. And what about Dean? How does he fit into this narrative now? By all accounts, he's honored that Melissa values their relationship enough to talk about it publicly. He's comfortable with the affection he feels for her and the affection she feels for him. He's not threatened by her revelations because they don't diminish anything. They only add depth and nuance to a friendship that has always been important to both of them. In a way, Melissa's openness has given Dean permission to be more open as well, to acknowledge that yes, those years were special. Yes, that connection was real. Yes, it mattered then and it matters now. The fans of Little House on the Prairie are having their own reactions to these revelations, and they're as varied as you might expect. Some feel vindicated in what they always suspected, that the chemistry between Laura and Almanzo was rooted in something genuine between the actors. Others are surprised, having assumed that Melissa and Dean were simply good at their jobs. Still others are moved by the grace with which both actors have handled this delicate subject, the way they've managed to honor the past without being trapped by it. And almost everyone is reminded of why they loved the show in the first place. Because it dealt with real emotions, real complications, real human experiences, even when those experiences were wrapped in the aesthetics of frontier life. There's also a generational aspect to this story that's worth considering. For those who watched Little House during its original run, Melissa Gilbert is forever tied to their own childhoods and coming-of-age experiences. Her revelations about Dean tap into their own memories of first loves, complicated feelings, and the process of figuring out who they were and what they wanted. For younger viewers discovering the show through streaming services and reruns, Melissa's story provides context and depth, transforming what might seem like a quaint period drama into something with contemporary emotional resonance. The feelings she describes, confusion, longing, the blur between fantasy and reality, the search for connection, are universal and timeless. As Melissa continues to share her story, she's also careful to maintain Dean's privacy and agency. She's not claiming to speak for him or to reveal things he might prefer to keep private. She's telling her side, her experience, her truth, while acknowledging that Dean has his own perspective and his own story to tell if he chooses. This respectful approach is characteristic of who Melissa has become. Someone who values authenticity but also understands boundaries, someone who believes in honesty but not at the expense of others, someone who has learned that you can own your narrative without controlling anyone else's. The broader implications of Melissa's revelation extend beyond her personal story. She's contributing to a larger cultural conversation about how we understand relationships, especially those formed in unusual circumstances like television production. She's challenging the binary thinking that says a relationship is either romantic or platonic, either real or fake, either successful or failed. Her relationship with Dean defies those simple categories. It was romantic in some ways, but not in others. It was real in its emotions, even if it was artificial in its circumstances. It succeeded in creating something beautiful and lasting even if it didn't follow the trajectory of a traditional romance. By sharing this complexity, Melissa is giving people permission to recognize the complexity in their own lives, to stop trying to fit their experiences into neat boxes, to appreciate connections for what they are rather than judging them against some external standard. There's also something powerful about the timing of this revelation. Melissa is speaking from a place of accomplishment and self-assurance. She's had a successful career not just as an actor, but as a director, producer, and activist. She's been president of the Screen Actors Guild. She's written best-selling memoirs. She's raised children and navigated multiple marriages and emerged as someone with wisdom to share. From this position of strength, she can look back at her younger self with compassion rather than judgment, can talk about vulnerability without being vulnerable, can share her story without needing validation or approval. This is what makes her revelation so compelling. It comes from a place of wholeness rather than woundedness. Dean Butler, meanwhile, has carved out his own impressive career, not just as an actor, but as a producer and as a guardian of Laura Ingalls Wilder's legacy. He's been involved in projects that explore the real history behind Little House on the Prairie, that separate fact from fiction, that honor the actual Laura Ingalls Wilder while acknowledging how her story was transformed for television. This dual role, actor who played a fictionalized version of a real historical figure and producer who seeks historical accuracy, has given him a unique perspective on the relationship between truth and storytelling. Perhaps this is why he's been so understanding of Melissa's need to tell her truth. He understands better than most that there are multiple truths, multiple perspectives, multiple valid ways of understanding the same events. As this story continues to unfold in the public consciousness, it's prompting people to think differently about their favorite shows and the actors who bring them to life. We tend to assume we know celebrities because we see them on screen, but Melissa's revelation is a reminder that what we see is always incomplete, always mediated, always just one aspect of a much more complex reality. The actors we love are human beings with interior lives as rich and complicated as our own. They form attachments, struggle with feelings, question themselves, make mistakes, grow, and change. The more we can remember that, the more compassionate we can be as an audience, and the more we can appreciate the genuine artistry and emotional labor that goes into creating the performances we love. What Melissa Gilbert has given us, ultimately, is a gift. She's given us a deeper understanding of Little House on the Prairie and the people who made it. She's given us insight into the experience of child stardom and the challenges of growing up in the public eye. She's given us a meditation on the nature of love and connection, and how we make sense of our own emotions. And she's given us an example of how to age gracefully, how to look back on your life with honesty and humor, how to share your story without bitterness or regret. At 61, she's not breaking her silence because she has to or because she's looking for attention. She's breaking her silence because she's ready, because it feels right, because there's value in completing the record and honoring something that was important to her. Dean Butler remains, as he has always been, a gentleman and a professional. His response to Melissa's revelations has been measured and kind, acknowledging their bond without exploiting it, supporting her journey without making it about himself. In many ways, his response confirms everything Melissa has said about him. He is indeed the kind of person worthy of the feelings she had, even if those feelings couldn't be realized in the way her younger self might have hoped. The mutual respect and affection between them is evident, and it's a testament to both of their characters that they've maintained such a positive relationship over so many years. For those of us watching this story unfold, it's a reminder that our favorite shows and movies are created by real people having real experiences. And sometimes those experiences bleed into the art in ways that make it richer and more resonant. Every time we watch Laura and Almanzo on screen, we're now watching with the knowledge of what was happening behind the scenes, the complicated emotions and genuine connections that inform those performances. It doesn't diminish the show. If anything, it enhances it, adding layers of meaning and authenticity that we might not have recognized before. As Melissa moves forward in her life, she carries with her all the experiences that shaped her, including her relationship with Dean Butler. She's not defined by it, but she's not denying it either. She's integrated it into her understanding of herself, accepted it as part of her journey, and found peace with how things unfolded. That's maturity. That's wisdom. That's the kind of emotional honesty that we should all aspire to. And in sharing her story, she's helping others who might be struggling with similar questions about their own past relationships, their own complicated feelings, their own process of making sense of who they were and who they've become. So when Melissa Gilbert breaks her silence about Dean Butler at 61, she's not just telling a story about two actors on a beloved TV show. She's telling a universal story about human connection, about the search for love and meaning, about the ways we grow and change and come to understand ourselves. It's a story that deserves to be heard without gasping, without sensationalism, without reducing it to gossip or scandal. It's a story about two good people who shared something special and who have honored that connection over the decades. And it's a story that reminds us that the best art comes from genuine emotion, that the performances we love are often rooted in real feelings, and that the line between life and art is not as clear as we might think. The legacy of Little House on the Prairie continues to grow with each generation that discovers it. The show has become a time capsule of a particular vision of American life, a comfort watch for people seeking wholesome family entertainment, and a cultural touchstone that shapes how we think about resilience, community, and family values. Knowing now about the real relationships and real feelings behind the fictional story only adds to that legacy. It humanizes the actors, deepens our appreciation for their work, and reminds us that great television isn't created in a vacuum. It's created by people bringing their whole selves to the process, sometimes in ways that are complicated and messy and beautiful. Melissa Gilbert's revelation is also a reflection of changing times and changing attitudes about privacy and disclosure. In an era of social media and constant sharing, the idea of holding onto a personal story for decades might seem unusual. But Melissa comes from a different generation of Hollywood, one that valued discretion and privacy, that maintained clearer boundaries between public and private life. Her choice to speak now represents a careful calculation about what serves her, what serves Dean, and what serves the fans who have supported them throughout their careers. It's not about following trends or generating clicks. It's about completing her own narrative and honoring a relationship that has been important to her for more than 40 years. And what of the future? How will this revelation affect how Melissa and Dean interact going forward? By all indications, it won't change much. They're comfortable with each other, they understand what they share, and they've already navigated the transition from co-stars to friends over many years. If anything, Melissa's openness might allow them to acknowledge their bond even more fully, to celebrate it publicly in ways that they might have been hesitant to before. It might open up new opportunities for them to work together, whether at fan events or in new projects that capitalize on their chemistry and their history. The key is that they're doing this on their own terms, with mutual respect and understanding, which is really all any relationship needs to thrive. For fans who have followed Melissa Gilbert's career and personal life over the years, this revelation is another piece of the puzzle, another insight into who she is and how she became that person. She's never been one to present a perfect facade or pretend her life has been easy. She's talked about addiction, about financial struggles, about relationship difficulties, about the pressures of fame. This honesty has made her relatable and beloved even beyond her work on Little House. People appreciate authenticity, and Melissa has it in spades. Her willingness to be vulnerable, to admit to complicated feelings, to acknowledge that she doesn't have all the answers, makes her someone people can identify with and learn from. As we reflect on this story, it's worth considering what it means for how we think about childhood crushes, about workplace relationships, about the connections formed in intense collaborative environments. Melissa's experience isn't unique. Lots of people develop feelings for coworkers or colleagues that complicate their professional relationships. What is unique is the public nature of her work, the age at which she was navigating these feelings, and the fact that millions of people watched the relationship unfold on screen without knowing what was happening behind the scenes. Her story provides a framework for thinking about these situations with more nuance and compassion, for recognizing that feelings don't follow rules or timelines, and that sometimes the most important relationships in our lives are the ones that defy easy categorization. In the end, what Melissa Gilbert wants us to understand is simple. Dean Butler mattered to her, matters to her still, in ways that are both ordinary and extraordinary. Their connection was real, it was meaningful, and it shaped her in lasting ways. She's grateful for it, even with all its complications. She values Dean as a person and cherishes their friendship. And she's ready, finally, to acknowledge publicly what has been true privately for decades, that sometimes the most important love stories are the ones that don't follow the expected script, the ones that exist in the spaces between categories, the ones that teach us about ourselves even when they don't give us everything we thought we wanted. At 61, with the perspective that only time can bring, Melissa can see the beauty in what she shared with Dean, can honor it without needing it to be something it wasn't, and can tell her story with grace, humor, and profound emotional intelligence. And that, more than any gasp-worthy revelation, is what makes her story worth hearing.